Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican featuring the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez. Today we are going back 100 years to 1925 and the founding of a group known as the Spanish Colonial Arts Society. Because of the society, art forms that were in danger of vanishing remain with us today, keeping alive our connection to a colonial past. That history is featured at the Nuevo Mexicano Heritage Art Museum with its current exhibition, 100 Years of Connecting. Here to explain it all is Carmella Padilla, author and cultural historian.
Hi, Inez. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Carmella. We're so glad you're here. Let's just start at the beginning. Why was the society formed and who did it?
Well, the society was formed early 20th century, had a lot of new residents of Santa Fe all getting very excited about the culture here, looking at it, I guess, through refreshed eyes, new eyes, and feeling like it really needed to be put on a pedestal in a different way, in a way that maybe newcomers were used to seeing more so than we were used to in New Mexico. So it was a time when new museums were being built. The museum, what is today's Museum of Art, had just been built in 1917. The Palace was the New Mexico History Museum. So people started looking at historic art forms like santos, devotional art, tin work, textiles, things that had been practiced, art forms that have been practiced in New Mexico over a couple of hundred years as works of art. Two people in particular, Mary Austin, who was a well-known, nationally known author, and Frank Applegate, who was an author and also a Spanish colonial art collector at the time, because these pieces were also starting to be collected outside of the communities where they were made. They got together with a number of other people to found an organization, a society, a gathering of people who were interested in the preservation of these art forms and the perpetuation of them, and to really wanted to encourage people to continue making these works.
It's kind of not, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but it's interesting that within a community, we take for granted what we have, and then it takes people with outside fresh perspective to say this is valuable. And even though it might be easier to not, embroider your tablecloth, if you learn this and pass it on, you're keeping something important alive.
Yes. And it is interesting because you don't know in those people's backgrounds if they value their own traditions in the way that they came here and wanted our traditions to be valued. It's a complicated time, and it's a really exciting time. It really sort of, these people, many who were involved in many organizations that had cultural importance and still have cultural importance today, they were all involved in all of these efforts to take a look at what was being done here in a new light.
Yeah. And that whole era in the United States in general, there was civic improvement. There was the idea that there were things worth preserving. And in Santa Fe, I don't think it's too big a stretch to say, even though this was a Spanish European town, of course, there was obviously Indians before, Native Americans were here much longer, and then there was the Mexican period and the Anglo-territorial period. Every once in a while, I know people feel like they get lost in their own town. And this was a group that really said, these works and this style of doing things is worth preserving.
Yes, and like most of these organizations that I'm talking about, many of which have celebrated 100 years recently, like Swaya's Indian Market just had a 100-year anniversary. The Old Santa Fe Association will have a 100th anniversary next year. All of these people were looking at the artworks and the buildings in town, partly in trying to elevate them on a national level, and partly to say these are important to the people who live here.
Yeah, no, that's true. And of course, the Zober just had its 100th anniversary as well.
That's right.
And it's a really interesting mix of what can happen when you value the heritage of a place and also open up to new ideas and new people. And it might be a lesson that we could learn today a little bit.
Yeah, and when you look at the Spanish Colonial Arts Society and what they've done over the years, and particularly if you look at it through the context of their collection, you'll see that there is this mingling of all these different cultural influences that really gave shape to who we are today as New Mexicans, or as Nuevo Mexicanos, Nuevo Mexicanos, which includes a very strong indigenous element as well. There was a sharing of materials, people.
Micaceous clay,
yes,
or
micaceous
weaving.
clay, weaving. All these influences interchanged through the cultures from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, the Navajo silversmiths wouldn't have become silversmiths without the silver that the Spanish brought.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. The churro sheep. The Navajo weavers today are prized weavers, and they tend churro sheep. The churro sheep came with the Spanish. So there was a really nice sharing and commingling. Yes, there was a lot of conflict as well, but it all gave shape to what we know today.
Yeah. Monsignor Jerome always talked about, what created the New Mexico culture, not, Spanish, Indian, Anglo, but the New Mexico culture. And it was that force, for good and bad that came together. And one of the things that I like about the museum, which originally was opened as the Spanish Colonial Arts Museum.
The Museum of Spanish Colonial Art, yes.
That's right. It wasn't just about New Mexico. It was looking at the Spanish colonies as a whole. Is that right?
Yes, looking at the influence of the Spanish colonial history of the Spanish colonial world and of New Mexico. Of course, New Mexico was a Spanish colony once upon a time. It's kind of hard to wrap your
we went all the way to Canada.
Right.
I've been looking at those maps.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the idea there was to really look at what was produced in New Mexico and see how it all had sort of filtered through these different time periods and different places and different expressions of the culture, because the expression of the culture in Spain is very different than that in Mexico, and of course very different in this. So,
because we were really the frontier in a way that meant that a lot of the things we did were not necessarily cruder, but they were more basic.
Partly because of a lack of materials,
right?
Even though there was a substantial trade going on throughout the colonial period. But it was, we didn't have the same, we didn't have, let's say, mother of pearl for inlay to do marquetry work. So what was done here instead was straw was used as an inlay to get that marquetry effect in the art form that is now known as straw applique. In terms of santos, saint making, you use local woods, what was accessible here. So those woods might have been very different from what
you might have gotten in a grove in Spain or in Cuba or Peru or any of those other places.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so this kind of showed what linked us, but then what was unique in our environment to make us different in terms of the art that we created.
Right, absolutely.
That's a really valuable lesson, because I think we forget how linked the world is.
Well, and also it became, there was influence, but because of the people who lived here and who had their own experience and their own individual creativity, it became very unique to this place. And a new expression was born out of that is now really closely identified with New Mexico.
That's right. It's our own unique art form. We'll be back in a moment to discuss the role of Chimayo in the society. This is Conversations Different.
Are you dreaming of a home of your own in Santa Fe but feel like it may never happen? HomeWise is here to help. We are a local nonprofit that has helped close to 7,000 New Mexicans from all income levels and backgrounds become homeowners. HomeWise has everything you need to succeed in home ownership, including free coaching and classes, real estate services, affordable fixed-rate mortgages with low down payments, and down payment assistance to qualified borrowers who meet income restrictions and credit qualifications. We'll be with you every step of the way. Get started today on your path to owning a home. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We are back with Carmella Padilla talking about 100 years of connecting. Let's go back to what I said before the break, and again, going back 100 years ago to talk about Chimayo, because I think the Spanish Colonial Arts Society played a really important role in the history of New Mexico that probably a lot of people don't know about. And part of it starts with the collection, but then it got bigger than that.
Yes. So the society was founded by a lot of people who were art lovers, but also who were preservationists. And so some of their first activities, whether it was purchasing art or collecting art as a means of preservation, also had to do with architecture. And it is a little known story, or lesser known than most, that at one point in time in the 20s, the now famous Santuario de Chimayo was privately owned by a family in Chimayo who could not afford its upkeep. And they were starting to sell off pieces from inside of the chapel, works of art. And I think the plan was to ultimately sell the chapel itself. So Mary Austin, who was a co-founder of the society, got word from Gustav Baumann, who was an artist in Santa Fe at the time, that this was happening. She happened to be back east somewhere, and she very quickly arranged to have some benefactor from back east donate the money to the society in order to purchase the Santuario de Chimayo. So the society purchased the Santuario. They did restoration on it, and then within that, I think it was like 4 years, in 1929, ultimately they gave the Santuario to the Archdiocese of Santa Fe.
So it remained a church.
Yes, so that it would remain a church, and also for public use as a sort of a religious art museum, which it is today as well.
Right. I mean, when you walk in there, you're seeing some of the best of the best.
Yes. So, the foresight of that was really amazing and groundbreaking. And if you think about how important that place is, the Santuario de Chimayo, to the people of New Mexico, and then also as an international destination, it's amazing. And
that's huge. I mean, you think about that compared to what happened to the Loretto Chapel.
Yes.
Which is still here, it's still in one piece, but it's not a church, and it's, not what it was meant to be.
Right. And, one of the cool things, I think, speaking of the Santuario, there's a bulto there, a carved sculpture of Santiago that we have records of Mary Austin seeing in the church in the 20s.
Oh, wow.
At the time. And that was one of the pieces that was going to be sold. And it's still there today on the altar, that very same bulto.
That's right. And how many people saw that over the decades?
Yes, as well as, of course, their very famous altar screens.
Right. And so Santiago is St. James, which I've always wondered why it's not St. Jaime, but, but he's a huge saint for the Spanish.
Yes.
Because he was their standard bearer they carried into battle and to all the different things that they did.
Yes.
So having him in that chapel meant a lot, I'm sure, to the people.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting they were selling because at the same time, people were stealing. I mean, a lot of saints that are in private collections, you don't really want to ask how they got there.
Right.
From 100 years ago.
Right. Yes.
And some people bought them to preserve them, and some people bought them just so they could have them.
Right. I often think about how many santos and other really important art forms actually left New Mexico as well, so that we don't have them. We have not seen, the full breadth of what was being created at that time. Although with the Spanish Colonial Arts Society and their collection, you get an opportunity to see a lot of that.
And one of the altar screens, an important altar screen, was purchased early on by the society. So what happened to that one? It was by José Rafael Aragon?
Yes, José Rafael Aragon. It's a circa 1840 altar screen. It was actually the society's very first acquisition for their collection when they decided to establish a collection. It's from the village of Llano Quemado in northern New Mexico. And the church at that time was going into ruin. It was falling down. There were a lot of repairs that were necessary. And the altar screen had been removed. And another altar screen was in the process of being made. So it was, I don't think it was damaged. I think it was being removed partly to raise some money for repair for the church. And also maybe, you never know. I mean, there were things that were we looked at as historical today that were sold because people wanted something more modern or something different. Anyway, the society purchased that as its very first acquisition. At that time, it did not have a museum as they do now, and it went on long-term loan to the Palace of the Governors in downtown Santa Fe. And it stayed there for decades, over 80 years.
So you used to go to the palace, and it was almost like there was a little church there.
Yes, it was. They had a beautiful exhibition that was, took the shape of a chapel, and the altar screen was a centerpiece, and then you had all these other santos all over, and you really could have a feeling for what that whole experience was like.
It was a very peaceful place.
Yeah. Definitely. And now, in honor of the 100th anniversary, the palace has actually returned the altar screen back to the Museum of the Nuevo Mexicano Arts Museum, it's now called,
right?
For public display. So it's back in its original ownership, in a place now that there is a venue for showing the collection.
And that's a special building.
Yes,
because it's a John Gamim designed building, and it's really lovely inside.
It's a house. It was designed as a house, built in 1930, originally to be the residence of the director of the Laboratory of Anthropology, which is also on Museum Hill. So the Laboratory of Anthropology had been built in 1925.
Another 100 years?
Yep. And the director's residence was built, basically next door in the possession for many years of the School of Advanced Research. And their director lived there. And then in about 1998, the building was gifted to the Spanish Colonial Arts Society for use as a museum, which was an original goal of the founders, was to eventually have a museum and a collection.
Right, a place to show what they had gathered.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So it took a while, but it finally got there. So that building in itself is historic, and it's really the only John Gamim residence that is open to the public today, even though it's taken shape as a museum. But you go in there and you feel that it's a house. It's very cozy, very beautiful.
It's really lovely. On that note, we'll take a quick break and be back again with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We are back with Carmella Padilla. Let's talk about what is in the exhibition, 100 Years of Connecting.
Well, it's a range of objects through time that are sort of interwoven with documentation of different milestones in the society's history. And those, you have art objects sort of in conversation with documentation, and which really provides the voice for people through time who have been involved with the society. So you have quotes from Frank Applegate and Mary Austin and a whole range of people who have influenced the evolution of the society, who have been involved in the society. Of course, you have the very first piece that was collected, which we were talking about earlier, as the centerpiece, one centerpiece of the exhibition, sort of a launching point. And then they have the very last piece that was collected just in last year in 2024, which is a piece by the Santero Vicente Teas from Albuquerque.
Okay.
And it's a modern, more modernized sort of retablo that has a theme of Chimayo as a pilgrimage site, which actually sort of goes back to that history
it's
of
like
Chimayo.
a circle.
Yeah,
that's really nice.
So I think that Jonna Gottschalk, who is curating the exhibition and who could give you more, insights into the specifics. But she really has made an effort to go through time and weave in all these voices and these experiences to show how things have evolved.
And one of the important things the society did right in the beginning as well was to give a forum for living artists to be able to sell their works and maybe make a living. Because in addition to people like in Santa Fe who might work for the state during the day and do art on the weekends, et cetera, you had whole villages that created art forums. And those people ended up being able to stay in their homes because they could come to Spanish Market.
Right. So Spanish Market was founded by the Society in 1926, so just a year after its founding. So next year will be another 100th anniversary of the Spanish Market. And it was that other sort of leg of their mission, which was to preserve art forms and buildings at that time, and also to perpetuate them. And so...
and you only do that if young people learn how to do the art.
Right, exactly. And so you had people who were encouraged to continue wood carving, people like José Dolores López from Córdoba, who was making furniture, and then he decided to try his hand at santos. Now those are some of the most beautiful, sort of recognizable santos from the early 20th century of New Mexico. It also provided a continuum with the collection. So if you had historical artworks, like an altar screen, then you had modern day people creating their renditions of those altar screens or those textiles or those ironwork,
right.
The tools of daily life. One very special thing about this collection is that it actually is the largest collection of works by Spanish market artists from the beginning of the market to today.
So it shows you maybe how the work has changed over the years and the evolution, because I know in recent years they've really worked hard to not box people in so that maybe they can be more contemporary while at the same time keeping the traditional roots.
Yes. And one really important thing of just providing a market, you can say, well, it's commercialized things a bit, but that's also in a way necessary to having people be able to do their artwork and support themselves in that and have a creative lifestyle that might be a supplement to their other work, or it might actually just be their primary work. So people like Vicente Tejas, who I was talking about, the last acquisition in the collection, he's a Spanish market artist today. Yeah. So he still benefits from what happened in the early 20s. Victor Goled, who's a master santero, very highly revered and recognized internationally, started in the Spanish market, continues to be in the Spanish market. There's a whole youth contingency, and the collection also reflects that. There's a great collection of youth art. Or works by younger artists.
Yeah, I switched to them because that's what I can afford now. But I have a couple that I'm waiting for them to become famous, and I'm going to say I got them at the beginning.
Yeah, so you have this, this pride and this continuation of things that are really valuable to the culture.
What I think is so amazing is, for one thing, how hard the artwork is. I mean, doing straw applique with those little razor blades and the straw. I mean, as you get older, you get bigger glasses. The work of someone like, Charlie Carrillo, who picks his plants and makes his own paints and those kinds of things. I mean, this is a really particular time-consuming way of making art.
Yes.
And I think especially, not all of it, of course, is religious, but for the people who really are faithful, spiritual people, whether they're Catholic or something else, you can feel it in their work. I mean, that's one of the things to me is so amazing. Like when you go to church and the altar screen, like in the chapel at Santa Maria, Charlie Carrillo did the altar screen there in the little chapel. I mean, it has this just amazing power.
Yeah. So there's the devotional art, which really expresses the bigger sort of history of Hispanic New Mexico as a predominantly Catholic community.
Yeah.
And also it expresses individual devotion.
Right.
But it's not all devotional art.
No, I mean the tin work, and that's interesting, because when did tin come to colonial New Mexico?
Not until the arrival of the Army.
Right.
And so you also see the influence of Americanization, and you could say the founding of SCAS was an extension of that, because it was founded mostly by people who came from elsewhere by train or whatever and landed here. But there's all of those layers. So you have the far back colonial world, Spain, Mexico, New Mexico, and all of the influences that came from Americanization.
Right. And beautiful, tin. I had a house once where we got tin light fixtures, and boy, I thought we were fancy, and they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's just taking, what I love about Spanish colonial art is you take something so basic,
right,
whether it's straw or whether it's tin or just a bit of thread, and you make something lovely for your home or for your life.
And it speaks to the resilience and resourcefulness and sort of commitment, cultural commitment of the communities that came here. It was not easy to come here,
no,
of course.
We're survivors.
Right, exactly. People came here, and, it's still hard to think, if I grew up in Santa Fe, what it would have been like to live in a small little village in the north, and that experience is still relevant today, and that's still happening.
I always tell my son the reason we gain weight so easily is our ancestors lived through famine a bunch. So culture, it's like in our genetics, we can't take extra calories. I mean, they had a very, very rough life, and even colonial Santa Fe 200 or 300 years ago, it was not an easy place.
It was not. It was muddy. It was.
Yeah.
It was. Pretty rough.
And you had to sit in the courtyard and do your embroidery if you were a girl,
Yeah.
It's what I love about this art form is the dedication of the people alive today to making sure that the knowledge and the sacrifices of their ancestors aren't lost.
Right. And it's really important because that's an intergenerational exchange. And I know, just going back to the museum and the society, educational programs that take place there, there's culture classes, other workshops.
That's when you do embroidery and poke your finger and bleed, and your grandma yells at you. That is why I am not a culture embroiderer. I got in trouble.
So yeah, the educational value of these historic collections and sharing them with new generations is also really a major part of what the society has contributed.
And I think there's something really aspirational if you're a little kid from Santa Fe or from Las Vegas or Mora or whatever, and you go to that museum and you see work by someone who looks like you, who does something that maybe you saw a form of in your home.
Yes.
Because my grandma always embroidered. I never thought anything special about it. And the first time I went to Spanish Market and I saw that there was a name for it, that was a really exciting moment in my life.
Right.
It's like, my grandma did culture embroidery. Who knew,
Well, and then also just the relevance today, there was a great exhibition at the museum last spring on lowrider bikes.
Right. That was amazing.
As an art form. And okay, is that a colonial art form? No, but it's a sort of a newer expression of younger generations.
Right.
And it's relevant because it's...
And they did blacksmithing back in the day, and you could argue that that's moving that forward.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, the museum is a really great place to get, exposure to the old and the new, and just to learn more about it, whether you're from somewhere else or whether you're from here. And I, like you, have that experience where I grew up here, but I didn't really necessarily understand these traditions as part of my heritage in a way that I really valued. It took time to value it, because for me it was everyday life. But when you look at it through the lens of it being an important artistic tradition and representing this whole lineage of time and creativity and everything else that goes into it.
And just the ability to adapt.
Yes, absolutely.
If our nativity broke, there's my grandma making plaster of Paris to make sheep and fix the baby Jesus. And I have a really European Santo Niño de Atocha, but some of it broke, and now the parts are all fixed by her. So it's just like this, you readapt, and you create something special.
Right.
And I think that's something that really always sticks with me is that in any little home you'd go to up north, there would be a bright bit of color, a santo, something carved, something drawn, whatever. And it showed you that people wanted beauty in their lives.
Absolutely. And that's, that is, they may not have thought about it initially as art.
Right.
It was just part of daily life. It was an expression that your grandmother handed down or whatever, but that was part of needing something beautiful that linked to the place you came from.
Yeah. No, that's true. And so the museum opened with one name, and now it's the Nuevo Mexicano Heritage
Arts Museum.
And talk about that switch, because that changed how Spanish Market is operated too.
Well, I think they were two different initiatives.
Okay.
The Spanish Market is now under the organizational stewardship of the Etrisco Heritage Foundation in Albuquerque, and it became something that, for the museum, it made more sense to have another organization running it. Right. That in itself is its only endeavor, and in fact, this society, until the opening of the museum, only ran the Spanish Market.
Right.
So taking on the museum is a whole other.
And they didn't have a huge staff. I mean, this isn't like a museum.
And they still don't have a
right.
This one great thing about this organization is, it's always been very grassroots. I mean, it continues to be. I'm sure.
Lots of volunteers,
yes,
that kind of thing.
Volunteers. They could use more staff, but with the name change, I think that there was a feeling among the board and other stakeholders that they really wanted to better reflect what the collection was about. That. It was not all about, if you think about, sometimes you think Spanish colonial art, you might be thinking about Cusco paintings, from Peru, a different type of art. And because the collection predominantly is made up of New Mexican artworks and speaks to the New Mexican period, there was a feeling that changing the name to the Nuevo Mexicano Heritage Arts Museum spoke more directly.
It shows that it's rooted in this place.
Yes.
So, and has that worked out, do you think, in terms of visitors or acknowledgement of what's there?
As I understand it, yes. Their visitation has gone up. A lot more local people coming to the museum, which is really great. And also, the big initiative that they implemented a couple of years ago is free admission, or maybe it was just last year, free admission all year round to the museum.
Okay.
So there's no fee to get into the museum or to be a member. I mean, ideally, maybe people want to donate and still support the museum, but, I think that was an expression of really wanting to bring all aspects of the community into the museum.
And that's important because a lot of times people don't know the history. They might know that there's Native art, they might see the cowboy paintings, but they forget that there's another kind of art form that is very rooted and is very beautiful.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. That's exciting. Are you excited?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of crazy. It's 100 years, and there's a whole year of events planned, that speak to all of their interactions through time with different communities. I think there'll be something happening in Chimayo. There's stuff happening in Albuquerque, and there's a lot that's still being developed for the year.
So you go to the exhibit, and then you maybe join the society, get the newsletter, and learn what's coming up so you don't miss anything that will teach you more about your own heritage.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that's exciting. I look forward to seeing the exhibit and learning more. And this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week.